Hey everyone, I'm working to hit 1,000 subscribers and I need your help to get there. If you enjoy the content, please hit that subscribe button right now. Dodgers Nation, buckle up, because this one is going to take you somewhere unexpected. We are talking about a trade idea that has been floating around baseball circles with just enough heat to demand a real conversation. A player swap between the Los Angeles Dodgers and the Boston Red Sox that would send struggling right-hander Bobby Miller east to Fenway Park in exchange for first baseman Triston Casas, a 26-year-old former top prospect who was widely considered one of the best young power hitters in the American League before his body started betraying him at the worst possible moments. Bleacher Report threw this concept into the baseball discourse, naming both Miller and Casas among 7 trade candidates worth watching. And the premise makes a certain kind of tabloid sense on the surface. 2 talented young players who have not been able to stick with their respective organizations, both buried deep on the depth chart, both potentially in need of a fresh start somewhere new. But here is the thing about this trade idea. The deeper you dig into it, the more complicated it gets. Because the Bobby Miller situation with the Dodgers in 2026 is not what you might think it is if you have only been following the headlines. And the Triston Casas situation with the Red Sox is even more nuanced, more heartbreaking, and more layered than the simple injured first baseman available framing suggests. These are 2 human beings at career crossroads in organizations that have both moved on from them in different ways, connected by a hypothetical deal that would require one team to bet on potential they have not seen in years and another team to part with something they are not fully ready to give up, even if the current state of their roster makes that almost impossible to admit. So let us start where this story has to start, with Bobby Miller, the former Dodgers top prospect who is currently navigating what he himself has described, with remarkable and humbling honesty, as rock bottom. Cast your mind back to 2023, because that was the last time the Bobby Miller narrative was a good one. He was the Dodgers' number 2 prospect in the system, a 24-year-old right-hander with a heavy sinker, a sharp slider, and the kind of swing-and-miss stuff that made scouts write words like frontline starter in their reports. He made his big league debut that April and was immediately electric. He threw 6 innings and struck out 11 batters against the St. Louis Cardinals in the Dodger Stadium home opener, the kind of debut performance that gets replayed on fan channels for years and sets expectations at a level that is genuinely hard to sustain. He went on to post a 3.76 ERA across 22 starts, struck out batters at an above-average rate, and finished the year with underlying metrics that suggested his surface-line ERA was actually understating how good he was. His expected ERA was 3.44. His fielding independent pitching number was 3.51. He was not just pitching well, he was pitching efficiently, limiting hard contact, generating weak swings, and doing it against major league lineups in a competitive National League West. The Dodgers had their guy. The future was arriving on schedule. And then 2024 happened, and the Bobby Miller story became one of the most baffling and frustrating chapters in recent Dodgers history. He made 13 starts. His ERA was 8.52. That is not a typo, 8.52. In 13 starts, more than 50 innings of work. He was one of the worst regular starters in the sport by that particular measurement. The shoulder inflammation that sent him to the injured list in the middle of the season explained some of it. The loss of velocity and command that preceded the IL stint explained the rest. He came back, made 4 more starts, and was sent to AAA Oklahoma City, officially demoted from a rotation that needed help because the alternative, leaving him out there, was worse. The Dodgers won the World Series that year. Miller watched from Oklahoma City and the alternate site and wherever the journey took him, carrying the weight of a career that had detonated without warning. Then 2025 arrived, and the stage was theoretically set for a comeback. Blake Snell had been signed. The rotation had legitimate depth, but spring training offered Miller 1 appearance before a line drive struck him in the head and removed him from the field. The injury slowed his entire build-up, prevented him from competing for a roster spot, and knocked him out of the opening day conversation before it ever really started. He received a spot start later in the regular season. It went poorly. He finished the year pitching out of the bullpen, going 0-4 with a 5.52 ERA in 22 relief appearances while posting a 6.26 ERA in 15 starts across his time with Oklahoma City. The numbers, stacked on top of each other across 2 seasons, tell the story of a pitcher who lost something fundamental and has not been able to find his way back to it. And now we are in 2026, and the Bobby Miller situation has taken yet another difficult turn. This spring, he arrived at Camelback Ranch with a renewed mindset, speaking with genuine and moving honesty about his motivation to return to the player he was 3 years ago. He used the phrase starting from rock bottom and working my way back up, just like I did before. He talked about the mental discipline required to not panic, to not force things, to trust the process even when the results were screaming at him to do the exact opposite. He spoke like a man who had done genuine soul-searching over the winter and arrived at spring training with a clear-eyed understanding of where he stood and what he needed to do to change it, and then his shoulder started barking again. Manager Dave Roberts confirmed in early March that Miller had yet to throw off a mound this spring due to what he described as a shoulder and arm issue. Not a full-blown shutdown, not a structural catastrophe, but enough soreness and concern that the Dodgers were being deliberately cautious about ramping him up, not wanting to push through early spring and create a situation where the problem compounds into something more serious. He eventually got on a mound for the first time on March 3rd, a light session of about 10 throws to a standing catcher, not off the rubber, nowhere near a full bullpen. Baby steps. The organizational decision had already been made before the shoulder issue even surfaced. Miller was going to pitch exclusively out of the bullpen in 2026. He was no longer competing for a starting spot. The rotation picture: Yamamoto, Ohtani, Glasnow, Sasaki, Snell, when healthy, left no room for a pitcher whose last 2 years as a starter have been a medical and statistical catastrophe. The bullpen was the new path, shoulder permitting. This is the reality that the Bleacher Report trade concept is working with when it frames Miller as a candidate to be moved. He is buried so deep in the Dodgers' organizational depth chart that he is not even in the conversation for the big league roster right now. He was not expected to make the 26-man group out of camp even before the shoulder issue resurfaced, and with the Dodgers' rotation boasting 6 legitimate big league starters fighting for 5 spots, the bullpen packed with arms like Edwin Diaz, Tanner Scott, Ben Kasparius, Jack Dreyer, and River Ryan working his way back from Tommy John surgery. Miller's path to meaningful innings in 2026 runs almost entirely through either a trade or a significant injury toll on the pitching staff that nobody wants to contemplate. The Dodgers have, according to multiple reports, quietly explored the trade market for Miller's services. He and outfield prospect Ryan Ward were specifically named as names the organization was willing to discuss. The market has not exactly exploded with enthusiasm, which is its own kind of commentary on how badly 2 lost seasons can erode trade value, even for a former top 25 prospect with legitimate big league stuff when everything is functioning. Now let us cross the country and talk about Triston Casas, because his story in 2025 and into 2026 is one of the more emotionally layered narratives in all of baseball, and it deserves to be told with the weight it carries. Casas arrived in the big leagues with the kind of credentials that make scouts drop their clipboards and start making phone calls. He was the Red Sox's first-round pick in 2018, a physically imposing left-handed hitter standing 6'4" with legitimate plus raw power and the kind of patient, disciplined approach at the plate that typically takes hitters years to develop. He hit .263, .367, .490 in 2023, launching 24 home runs across 132 games, finishing 3rd in American League Rookie of the Year voting, and establishing himself as what many believed would be the cornerstone of Boston's lineup for the next decade. The slash line was not just impressive in isolation. The .367 on-base percentage told you he was not swinging at bad pitches to generate those numbers. He was combining genuine power with elite plate discipline in a way that the Red Sox's front office had been dreaming about since the day they drafted him. Then 2024 arrived and the injuries began. Torn cartilage in his ribs limited him to just 63 games. He hit well in the time he was available, posting an .800 OPS that showed the offensive profile was still intact. But 63 games is not enough to establish anything, build momentum, or silence the concerns about durability that were starting to attach themselves to his name. Boston remained patient. He remained optimistic. The 2025 season was supposed to be the one where Casas stayed on the field long enough to remind everyone what a fully healthy, fully available version of him looked like. He played 29 games. On May 2nd, running out a ground ball. Not a collision, not a freak accident, just a man sprinting toward first base. He tore the patellar tendon in his left knee. The surgery came quickly. The timeline was immediately described as double-digit months. Standing on crutches with a large cast on his leg, Casas spoke to the media a month after the injury and delivered some of the most gutting and genuine words anyone has said in a baseball context in recent memory. He called it living his worst nightmare. He acknowledged it was the worst-case scenario for any player. And then, in the same breath, he said his goal was opening day 2026 and that he believed going through this would make him better on the other side of it. He did not hide from the devastation. He named it, sat in it, and immediately started talking about climbing back out of it. The Red Sox, for their part, moved on in the practical ways that organizations have to move on. They signed Wilson Contreras away from the Cardinals to serve as their first baseman in 2026, with the understanding that Casas would not be ready when the season opened, and the recovery has tracked mostly as expected, which is to say slowly and carefully, exactly as a patellar tendon rupture demands. Casas has been working out this spring in Fort Myers. Videos of him in the cages and doing defensive drills circulated through social media in late February and early March. Manager Alex Cora told reporters he was moving well and that there had been no setbacks. The progress was genuinely encouraging on the soft indicators, the mobility, the swing work, the general physical function of a man who had spent the winter committed to getting his body right. But here is where the spring training update arrived to complicate the picture further. Casas confirmed earlier this week that he will not appear in any Grapefruit League games before camp breaks. He had hoped to get into exhibition action. That hope did not align with where the recovery actually stood. The remaining hurdles, base running progressions, sliding clearances, the kind of high-intensity lateral and explosive movement that a patellar tendon rupture specifically compromises, have not yet been fully cleared. Cora was explicit. There has been no setback. This is simply where the timeline is. And Casas himself, channeling that same composed, clear-eyed honesty that defined his post-injury press conference back in June, said something that deserves to be quoted directly and absorbed completely. "This was a major injury and I'm a great player. I don't find any reason to rush this process. Whenever I feel ready to come back is when I am going to contribute best." That is not an injured player making excuses. That is a man who has thought hard about who he is, what he can do, and how to navigate a situation that could break someone with a weaker mental foundation. The current expectation for his return to game action is somewhere around May, roughly 1 year from the injury itself, which aligns with the standard recovery window for a patellar tendon rupture of this severity. He will almost certainly need a minor league rehabilitation assignment before the Red Sox bring him back to the big league roster, giving him the at-bats and the game reps necessary to function as a professional hitter after being away from game action since May 2nd of last year. The Red Sox have 3 remaining minor league options on his contract, which means there is no service time clock or roster manipulation concern complicating the decision. They can bring him back when he is actually ready, not when the calendar says he should be ready. Now, here is where the trade concept gets genuinely interesting because both of these players have legitimate appeal in the context the Bleacher Report piece laid out. The idea that a change of scenery might unlock something in each of them that their current situation simply cannot provide. The Miller for Casas framework asks you to believe, first, that the Red Sox would want a starting pitcher who has not started well in 2 years, is currently battling a shoulder issue in spring training, has been moved to the bullpen by his current organization, and whose trade value is probably at the lowest point it has been since he was a prospect. And second, that the Dodgers would want a first baseman who has not played in a game in 10 months, who will not be cleared for game activity until at minimum May, who would need to clear final rehab milestones and a full minor league rehab assignment before he could contribute at the big league level, and whose most recent available campaign consisted of just 29 games before his knee gave out. The Bleacher Report piece correctly identified the likely hang-up. The Red Sox are probably the team that says no here, and the reasoning is straightforward. Boston believes Casas can still hit the way he hit in 2023. They believe his power is real, his plate discipline is real, and that a fully healthy version of him is a genuine middle-of-the-order presence. Those convictions are backed by the actual numbers. A 118 OPS plus across his career, 45 home runs in 251 games, and a peak campaign that put him in Rookie of the Year conversations. You do not trade that upside for a pitcher who is coming off a 5.52 relief ERA and has not started effectively since George W. Bush was still a cultural reference point. The Dodgers would need to sweeten the package significantly, adding prospect capital that makes the return more compelling than Miller alone could ever be. From the Dodgers' side, the value proposition is also murkier than the surface concept suggests. Yes, they have Freddie Freeman locked in at first base on a long-term deal, which means Casas would not be walking into a starting lineup spot in Los Angeles. He would be a depth piece, a designated hitter option on days when the lineup needs shuffling, a left-handed power bat coming off the bench on his road back from surgery. That is not nothing. The Dodgers value roster depth extraordinarily highly, and a fully healthy Casas contributes real offensive value. But you are trading even a limited version of Bobby Miller, who at minimum provides organizational pitching depth and carries the theoretical upside of eventually rediscovering his 2023 form, for a player who cannot help you until May at the earliest, and whose role on the roster would be definitionally limited by the presence of Freeman. The team control element is genuinely real on both sides. As the Bleacher Report piece noted, Miller is under team control through the end of the decade at a reasonable cost. So is Casas, who signed a one-year, $1.61 million deal to avoid arbitration this offseason, essentially proving he is one of the most affordable young players with his offensive ceiling in the entire sport. Neither of these moves would blow up a payroll or create financial complications for organizations that are both spending at or near the competitive tier of the market. The trade, if it happened, would be clean from a financial perspective. The complication is purely about what you actually believe you are getting and whether the timing makes sense for either club. And here is the honest bottom line on this trade concept. It is more intellectually interesting than it is practically likely. The Red Sox do not have a reason to move Casas for Miller at this specific moment, because the scenario in which Casas becomes a tradable asset is the scenario where he returns from his knee injury and demonstrates he can still hit with power, at which point his value skyrockets past what a Bobby Miller return could ever match. If Casas comes back in May and rakes at AAA, posts a 400 OBP and a 500 slugging percentage in his minor league rehab, and returns to the big leagues looking like the 2023 version of himself, Boston is not trading him to Los Angeles for a reliever who has been dealing with shoulder issues all spring. They are building around him. They are figuring out how to get him 400 at-bats in a crowded roster. And they are listening to contract extension conversations that make him the franchise cornerstone they drafted him to be in the first place. Conversely, if Casas comes back and struggles, if the knee affects his explosiveness, limits his range in the field, takes something off the bat that used to be among the most dangerous in the American League, then his trade value has cratered to a level where the Dodgers would not need to offer Miller to acquire him anyway. They could likely get him for less. The moment this trade makes sense is an extremely narrow window. Before Casas plays again, while his theoretical upside is still intact, but before the on-field proof arrives to confirm or deny it. That window closes the minute he steps into a batter's box in Worcester or Portland and starts showing scouts what he has left, which means the Dodgers would need to be confident enough in their projection of his recovery, confident enough to send away a former top prospect and organizational depth piece on the basis of believing a man coming off patella tendon surgery will be what he was 3 years ago, to pull the trigger now in